Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Elise. Today starts an exciting series for me where I'm going to do Christmas cards, Christmas in July, all throughout the month. So this is my first set of cards. There are some messy, easy to replicate watercolor cards. So I'm going to use this set from Mama Elephant with the big Merry Christmas. They also had some really nice coordinating sentiments. Those are 4 pieces cut down of Canson Watercolor XL paper. And then I'm going to show you the watercolors. I'm going to be using some palettes that have some shimmer in it. And then my Gonzai Tombi palette as well. For the last card, I'm going to be using Distress Oxides. For the green, Lucky Clover, Bundled Sage, and Evergreen Bough. And for the red, it's Candied Apple and Fired Brick. I also have my anti-static powder bag and some Hero Arts white embossing powder. And my brushes. These are the Zen brushes. And all of the supplies will be linked down below and also in my blog post. So I have got my Misty tool and I'm going to be repeatedly stamping that Merry Christmas sentiment onto my panels. So just going to take that panel, place it in, take off my stamp and find where I want to put it. For all of these cards, so the Canson watercolor paper has a smooth side and a more textured side. I am using the smooth side for all of these cards. So just using that anti-static powder bag, using Versamark ink, making sure I really have all the static out, and stamping that down. And this is the first time I've used this stamp set, so I am going to stamp that twice. But for every card here on out, I only stamp it once. I ditched the Ranger mat because it was making everything just slip and slide around. So I will then take this out of my Mini Misty, coat it with the powder, and then repeat that for the remaining 3 panels. Just make sure that is good and coated. And then I will move on to the next ones and then heat set all of these panels. For time's sake, I'm just showing you that process once through for each time, even though I'm doing it 4 times because I'm going to end up making 4 cards. So get all of those heat set and then we can start the watercolor process. So I've got an Epicurean cutting board here that I use for both watercoloring and heat setting, and I'm just using regular old blue painter's tape to tape that down to my board. That is the kind of tape, like you would use to paint, section off your trim so you don't get paint on your trim when you're painting your room. So this is that Gonzai Tombi palette. And I've got all of my little swatches there. And I'm taking the largest of those Zen brushes and just laying down a coat of water. And then going to look at that palette and decide which colors I want to go for. Wet down the color. These watercolors, you put water into them and then mix up the color. And then just kind of slap down the color. Nothing fancy, nothing formal or precise, just laying down some color and then going in with another shade of green. This is a more rich kind of blue green where the first was a more piney sage green, I would say. And then going in to some red. Now for a lot of these cards, I'm using traditional Christmas colors, meaning red and green. If you're not careful, you'll end up with brown. So I'm pretty careful with washing these dry, and I do use heat gun on these. And so if ever there's a color that gets to be too muddy, I kind of blot it off through the drying process so that I don't end up with muddy brown. In one of those blotting, I kind of picked up too much paint
And so I just put a little dab back in, spread it out, and I'll set that one aside to dry it. And the first panel is done. So for the second one, I'm using the Starry palette, which is all golds and kind of champagne tones and silver. And I thought this one could be really fun and pretty and different. So same manufacturer on these. So you put the water in and then you mix up the color like you see me doing. And I've already wet down that panel and I'm just laying down the color. Some of these ended up being a lot lighter than I thought they would be. So you can't see it, but at the end of that palette is a much darker gold tone, which I use a lot in this card to add in some depth. I really wanted you to be able to like see the difference in the golds, and I think that you can in person, but sometimes it's hard to tell on camera. And like I said, a lot of these colors ended up being a lot lighter than I thought they were going to be, especially when it dried down. And when you have white embossing on white paper, I think you need contrast with color. And so I ended up going back in on these a lot and adding in more of those darker gold tones. So same with the first one, nothing formal. Kind of just laying down color, no rhyme or reason. I'm just trying to get a good coating of color onto this card. So it's got a lot of water now. So I bring in my heat gun and start the drying process. My heat gun is already pretty warm because I've been drying the other cards and heat setting that embossing powder. So I do go in and add more of those darker tones. Like I said, once it dried back, it was a little bit hard to see that sentiment. So just went in with some more color and some darker tones. And once I'm kind of happy with how it looks, I will heat set it again and then take it off the board and let it dry completely. Moving on to the third. So this is very similar to the Starry panel where it's like a shimmery watercolor. This is the Gem palette, and it's got a really nice red and green and gold in it. And I thought it would be neat for this one to do something different. And so I did some striping on this where I'm using a flat brush instead of a rounded tip brush and just doing some really loose stripes. So I'm mixing those paints together and then I'll start in on the stripes. So here is that red. It's a really warm, more brick red, I would say, but it makes for a really nice holiday card, I think. So then gonna go in with that gold, and that paintbrush is just the perfect size to go up and down those wells. It fit perfectly. So rinsing out my brush and going in with the green, and you really start to see that sentiment shine through. This is another one where the colors were a little bit light, and so I did end up going in a few times on coats just to make sure I got a really clear message that the Merry Christmas really did stand out. Like I said in the intro, this stamp set has a lot of really great coordinating sentiments that you could either stamp on the inside of the card or make a sentiment strip and put on the front. I wanted a little bit of that green to show on the bottom, so I went ahead and just added a little bit of color on the bottom. And then here I am going back in and adding a little bit more color to those to try to get them to darken up. Once I get it how I like it, I heat set it and set it aside. So now I'm going in with those oxides. Again, this is where that potential for muddiness comes in because I'm mixing red and green. So something that's really, really neat about Distress Oxides is that wet on wet blends, but wet on dry layers. And so I started with my green layers, those 3 colors, and just laying down some color. and I dried that completely. And then here I've got the candied apple and the fire brick. And I am just getting that wet and now taking my dry green panel and putting that down on top so that the red is laying on top of the green. And you don't get that muddy effect because I had dried the green down. So that's something that's really, really neat about oxides. I could see doing this with some blues as well, kind of a more, winter wonderland type theme colored card. But I kind of wanted to stick with some classic Christmas colors. So now I'm going to take Nina 110 Solar White. That's what I use for my card bases. Just scoring those, folding them down, and then on all of these, I'm going to take my big old roll of foam tape and add quite a bit of tape to the back of these panels, especially because they're watercolor. I want to make sure that they stay flat. And I also know, I mainly mail Christmas cards, so I want to make sure that they stay, that none of the areas sag. So I thought for some of these, I would add some sequin. So these are both Pretty Pink Posh sequin mixes. Like I said, I'll have all of the supplies listed down below. So on that stripe one, I used, I actually believe this is called Classic Christmas, and it is like a really shiny red and gold and green that I thought went perfect with this stripe card. I wasn't sure at the beginning how much I would like this stripe card, but in the end, I really loved it. So just putting a scattering of those with some Tombow Mono multi glue. That is really hard to say. And just putting those down, and it adds just a little bit more shine to that card that's already pretty shiny because of that shimmer watercolor. And on this one, I'm taking another mix. This one's far more muted, so I thought it would look nice on this red and green card. That was the first card that I made, and that one probably did end up being my favorite. I really liked this card, and I think it's really, really lovely. So part of the reason why I'm doing this series is because I think so many of us get overwhelmed come the holidays with everything else that we're doing, to then think about making cards to send to our family and friends there's just no way. You get to all of a sudden it's December 15th and you still haven't made cards and there's not even enough time to mail them. So I thought it would be nice if I got a jump start on the holidays. And this was really simple. It took me about an hour to make 4 cards, which ends up being pretty good, I think, time-wise. I think so many of us could probably say it takes us an hour to make 1 card. So here are the 4 finished cards for today. Like I said, this is going to be a series on my channel throughout the month of July. So hit the subscribe button so you can come back and see the other cards that I make. I'm also going to be making some gift tags in there. So I think it'll be a lot of fun and I'd love to have you join me. Thank you so much for watching this video. On the next screen, there'll be a place where you can watch my last video and subscribe. Thank you so much and have a great day.